Shot right up here in this room here. And a very small room, you know, Kurt was singing into the wall.
It was always a necessity. Whatever was needed to be done, he would do it to further his music.
It was always Kurt, yeah. Kurt, he was always lyrics. We'd practice 7, 8 hours the same song, you know, until Kurt was happy with it, you know.
He was always pretty much focused in those days around, you know, music, survival and music, and survive to make or play music.
Ryan Eigner was responsible for getting Cobain and Co. their first gig. He organized the band's appearance at a place called Raymond.
So, and here I was pushing them out of that safety of their little rehearsal room and saying, let's go test this out somewhere. And so Raymond was probably the wrong place in some ways, you know, but it also was a good galvanizing, you know, effect where they sort of took one on the chin. They weren't embraced and loved for everything they did. And
the Backwater audience was unsettled by the band. The musicians were sort of odd and clearly had no interest in playing to a load of hicks.
Well, Raymond's kind of the wrong direction. You see the metropolis, the urban, that's where you think you're headed. And Raymond has nothing to do with Raymond or any other rural town. It was just, you know, he wanted to go to Olympia. Olympia was the big city, or at least east, you know, because we're as far west as you could possibly go, you know. So let's go east.
Aberdeen's population consists of highly bigoted, redneck, deer-shooting, faggot-killing logger types who ain't partial to weirdo new wavers. The dream of becoming a professional musician gradually gained pace. Olympia, the capital of the state of Washington, was the next stage. A university city with a very different atmosphere from the run-down lumberjack backwater of Aberdeen. Olympia was full of students and had a lively music scene. There's still one rehearsal room after another in Band Alley, as it's known. And the ethos of Olympia is still creative and cool.
That was the first time I'd ever been to a party where it was a solid Mohawks, and, you know, we played this party, and some guy got on the mic and said, "Drummers from Aberdeen sure are weird looking," you know. They didn't think I was cool because I didn't have a mohawk and shit, but I was in it for the music, so I didn't care.
Like Aaron Burkhart, Dave Foster is a former drummer with Kurt Cobain's band. With various bands, like Psycho Samaritan, they're still following the lead set by Nirvana.
Kurt had named our fifth name was Nirvana. We went through 5 names. But our first name was Skid Row, and then we played live here in Olympia at the Chaos radio station, midnight show. And the very next day, I showed up for band practice. He drew a picture on his easel with paintbrush of a pen, a writing pen, with its cap all chewed up, you know? And that was our second name, was Pen Cap Chew, right? And then from Pen Cap Chew, we went to Ted Ed Fred, and then we went to Bliss, was our fourth name. And then their fifth name was Nirvana. And that's when I got fired.
Here they are, Nirvana.
Well, they were playing opening acts a lot, midweek, terrible shows, nobody there. Parties, they did the Chaos Radio thing, and that was really a big turning point. Because so many people heard that, the tape was bootlegged, and then things really started spreading. And then when they would play, people would actually show up.
Green State College in Olympia, Washington. Welcome to KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia's community radio.
Slowly, the band turned into a professional enterprise. Kurt Cobain moved to Olympia with Tracy. The city became their creative focus. On Pear Street, they moved into a house that was chaotic, Spartan, bohemian.
But I remember he always ate like a bird. He never had a stove or at the house there, he didn't have a stove or refrigerator. You know, he had a toaster oven, that was it. He was never the norm. He was always bohemian type, you know, and he never, I don't know, he was just different, you know. He had a picture of Bobby Sherman, a portrait of Bobby Sherman, you know, in his bedroom, you know. He just did weird things, you know. He was always weird, you know, different.
He just was really into his art, and I mean, his whole house is covered with it. You know, sculptures, drawings. Always playing his guitar. He was pretty much a homebody. He didn't like to go out.
Morbid motifs, collages with lots of flesh, extracts from anatomy books. Kurt Cobain had painted and drawn from a young age, and to the end of his life, the visual arts remained an abiding passion.
You know, he thought that maybe he could be an artist. He never pursued it that much. I mean, I've had the benefit of seeing a lot of his art that no one's ever seen. It's all locked in a vault somewhere. A few items are in the Cobain Unseen book, but I've seen 25 paintings of Kurt's that I think, I'm a music critic, not an art critic, but I think they're very good. They show a lot of talent, I think.
Art as an alternative to the rock star's existence. Years later, at the height of his fame, Cobain used to withdraw for weeks on end and paint.
Kurt called me up one Sunday afternoon and said, "You have to come over right now." And I said, "Oh, Kurt, you know, it's a Sunday afternoon. I don't know if I have film or I have to get the cameras together." And he's like, "No, the flowers are going to wilt." I'm like, "What is he talking?" I said, "Okay." So I ran over to his house, and he made this collage on the floor of the living room, and he wanted me to photograph it for the cover of In Utero. So not really my forte, but I set up and did it. And you know, my favorite shot from that is Kurt and Francis. Francis toddled over to look at the collage, and so I took just a few quick snaps. Kurt and Courtney had probably been in their pajamas all day, but you know, this is about 7 o'clock in the evening.
When he was living in Olympia, Cobain only had thoughts of a career in music. His journals of the period are full of interviews he imagined giving as a rock star. That was to remain a distant vision until 1988. Greetings. Nirvana is a three-piece spawned from the bowels of a redneck logging town called Aberdeen, Washington. Only together for 7 months, they have acquired a single, a demo, and an LP. Success, fame, and a following of millions. Seattle, 1988. Nirvana had arrived in the big city.
We are driving in Seattle on Leary Way in the area kind of Ballard, Fremont, and it's in this neighborhood which 25 years ago was far more run down, that Nirvana came to record their first recording session ever. It's where they did Love Buzz, the single, and it's also where they recorded the album Bleach. This area used to be super duper cheap. You could buy a building here for nothing, and nowadays it's like super expensive and lots of restaurants. And this little humble building to the left here is the recording studio that Nirvana cut Bleach. In some ways, it's the place that made Nirvana Nirvana.
They were very well prepared and they were good players. And I also remember thinking, this guy's voice is really interesting. I like the way he sings. You know, even then you could tell. I mean, you can listen to these recordings and you can hear the character of the voice is very good. They did everything just, you know, almost one take. It was literally like they played live in the studio almost. Literally just banged it out.
Trying to place the first demo with the record company proved difficult. Tracy sent out dozens of copies accompanied by forthright letters from Kurt. We are willing to pay for the majority of pressing of 1,000 copies of our LP and all of the recording costs. We basically just want to be on your label. Do you think you could please send us a reply of fuck off or not interested so we don't have to waste more money sending more tapes? Thanks, Nirvana. The demo did in fact result in their first record contract with Sub Pop, a new Seattle label.
And Sub Pop, the label, was just getting started, and I knew those guys had a record label, and and they said to me, "Look, you hear something good at the studio, you run it by us. We're looking for bands to put on our label." So, the Nirvana thing was a logical one to pass on to them, and they didn't initially like it that much. It was too metal.
But the label boss caught a Nirvana gig and gave them a chance. The first single, Love Buzz, was a critical success and was quickly followed by the album Bleach.
Kurt himself paid for the cost of Bleach. It cost $606 to record. There's probably no album in the history of the world that was recorded so cheaply and ultimately made so much money. The area that we're standing in back in the late 80s was really a hotbed of the music scene. There are funny stories about that. This neighborhood's a little bit dangerous even still today sometimes, but when Kurt first came to Seattle, he was so afraid he was going to get mugged that he stayed in his car until the show began.
Kurt Cobain would have to get used to life in the tour bus. He was determined to go on tour straight after Bleach. On their first trips across America, Nirvana was so poor that they had to hope for a big enough audience at night to be able to pay for the gasoline to the next gig. The years on the road had begun.
Another myth is that people think Nirvana was an overnight success. Well, so here was somebody who very much wanted fame. And so what that meant was put an album out, tour. He played 5 tours before Nevermind came out. They'd played thousands of shows. They had toured Europe. They had been everywhere at that point. So it was hard work that made them famous.
The initial Nirvana shows, just weren't that impressive, really. They were okay. You could tell that there was something going on. But, they obviously needed to work on it a little bit, which they did.
And so it was usually very crowded in the van and very smelly, and a lot of juvenile jokes going around, and it was a good time, but I think pretty trying, for everybody, and I think especially for Kurt. I mean, he suffered from a lot of health issues. And I think that it was really, really trying for him, and quite possibly those early years, may have forced him into drug use. So just because of his health issues.
Kurt Cobain shaped every aspect of the band and its performances. Nothing was left to chance.
He came into the loft, and I had this white backdrop paper set up, and he's like, "Oh God, not just a boring white backdrop." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. What should we?" He's like, "Well, let's draw something on it or paint something on it." I'm like, I look around, and there happened to be a can of black spray paint. So I was like, "Here, knock yourself out," and that's what he came up with, and it is kind of symbolic in that the Chad was and always posed under the minus symbol there.
On their way to the top, Nirvana replaced drummer Chad Channing with Dave Grohl, and Kurt split up with his long-standing supporter Tracy Marander. What he needed now, he said, was someone he could talk to about art. The dead weight of the past had to be jettisoned, both privately and professionally.
That was the change from the first demo into Bleach, and then continuing from the Bleach album into the Nevermind record, is the songs got a little simpler and the melodies got more complex.
Seattle, the 17th of April 1991. In a club called OK Hotel, Nirvana tried out a new song, Smells Like...